we have a law that we have to meet, and we have lawmakers in front of us who have the ability to help us fund it. And that is what we're asking right now.
Good afternoon and welcome to the virtual Joint Board of Education and Howard County Delegation meeting of Tuesday, January 4th, 2022. The public has been invited to access this virtual board meeting through several telecommunication platforms. Those are Verizon 42, Comcast 95, and via live stream online. Telecommunication providers are occasionally experiencing technical problems due to the current heavy demand. If you have technical difficulties accessing this meeting through any medium, the medium you've selected, please use other platforms. Mrs. Harrison, please do the board roll call.
Ms. Delmont Small.
Present.
Dr. Liu.
Present.
Ms. Mallow.
Present.
Ms. Mosley. Ms. Watts.
Present.
Dr. Wu.
Present.
Ms. Catronio.
Present.
I'm confirming a quorum.
Delegate Lamb or Delegate Watson, please do the roll call for the delegation.
Sure, I can start. I guess we can start with the Senate side. Myself, Senator Lamb, I'm present. Senator Hester. Not see Senator Hester. Senator Gazzotti.
Senator Lamb, I'm sorry. Senator Hester is here, she says, and she's trying to get on the platform.
She's as a panelist. I see Vanessa Atterbury as well.
Yeah.
Oh, I see Senator Hester now. Great.
Yeah, Delegate
Thanks for
Frick won't be on.
Thanks for the promotion, everybody.
Delegate Watson, do you want to go through the House members?
Yes, I see Delegate Kittleman and Delegate Terraza, Delegate Novotny. Let's see who else. Delegate Atterbury is here. And did I miss anyone? If I did, please speak up.
Ms. Watts, since I'm using my phone, I can't see participants. Can you see if there's a quorum of county council here? If not, if we do, then they need to do roll call. But if not, then if there are 3 members.
Excuse me, sorry, Ms. Catronio. Did we mention Senator Gazzoni? Gazzoni, he's here.
Delegate Senator Lamb, did you mention Senator Gazzoni?
We did, but I think he joined after we already went to the
Okay.
Senate. So glad to see Senator Gazzoni joining us.
Okay.
Thank you.
I
Okay,
do
thank
not see enough county council members to make a quorum.
Okay, well then we can just move on to our agenda. Welcome to all who are here, delegation, county council, and anybody from the county executive's office. This is a meeting dedicated to Kerwin. I'll be very brief. Vicki Catronio, the chair of the Board of Education. We felt this meeting was important to highlight the unusual impact that Kerwin could potentially have on Howard County in funding. So we thought it behooved us to have a meeting where we could discuss this. I'm going to turn the meeting. And first, I want to also say that Dr. Martirano is sick, so he will not be here today. I'm going to turn the meeting over to Dr. Caroline Walker, who's going to do a presentation on Kerwin. And then this is only an hour long, so hopefully everyone will get their questions answered, but certainly we can follow up afterwards if we can't get to everyone. Thank you.
Delegate Jessica Feldmark has joined us.
Thank you.
And Delegate Eric Ebersol has joined us.
Welcome. Thank you for attending. Dr. Walker, are you on?
And thank you, Ms. Catronio. I'm also joined today by Danielle Lucan, Legislative and Legal Affairs Officer, and Darren Conforti, our Executive Director of Budget. For those of you that are not aware of this, as I start to share my screen, I am Howard County's interim Kerwin coordinator.
Dr. Walker, I'm having trouble hearing you. Can you go closer to your mic, or I don't know if anyone else?
I absolutely can.
Okay,
Is that better? I
Yep.
suspect that I have to just position it a little bit differently. Thank you. So you can see my screen, right? Progress. Danielle's going to give us.
Yes. Good afternoon, Chair Catronio, members of the board, Deputy Superintendent Turner Little, and the many elected officials with us today. As Dr. Walker said, I'm Danielle Looking, Legislative and Legal Affairs Officer in our Office of the General Counsel. Just as we're about a week away from the start of the 2022 session of the General Assembly, I first wanted to say that I'm looking forward to working with the members of the delegation to advocate on behalf of the board on the education-related legislation coming forward. So today I'm going to kick off our staff presentation regarding the Howard County Public School System's efforts to plan for the implementation of the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. Staff from a cross-divisional array of expertise has been working to understand the implications as well as opportunities of the many provisions of the law. And through 5 work groups, one for each of the major Blueprint initiative areas, as well as a leadership team, all headed by Dr. Walker, our interim Blueprint coordinator, we've had weekly meetings that have included familiarization with the law to broader audiences across the school system, as well as development of project tasks and establishing timelines for implementation, and not just due dates as specified in the law, but looking at how we build and prepare sequentially for each project task, as well as identifying areas that will require clarification to move forward. And the work groups are not only diving into each minute printed word of the law to determine how to put this into action, but also looking at how each area impacts and intricately overlaps with each other so that we are prepared to meld these changes into the daily operations at every level of the school system. So for instance, when we're talking about pre-K early childhood education, not just additional students in the classroom, but what resources are going to come from our human resources for staffing and professional development, and what will come from our operations and school planning for additional space needed, as well as school administration for planning of coverage of related services outside of the actual classroom itself, and so on. And Dr. Walker is going to touch on the significant needs identified by the work groups for her portion today. You can go to the next slide. And at the core of the expectations and future funding decisions is the much anticipated comprehensive implementation plan that will be developed by the newly formed Accountability and Implementation Board with MSDE guidelines for judging the compliance of the local plans to come before the HCPSS plan would be due in June. And while the blueprint has laid out requirements in the law, so we must provide additional behavioral health services, we need to close achievement gaps and give teachers more collaborative time. These plans will be the foundational guideposts of success, how success is measured for the requirements of the blueprint. And all of this is to say that the implementation guidelines and state plans yet to be developed will have a significant impact on the local planning moving forward. And perhaps the most pressing task and at hand for staff implementation planning at this time has been the work group efforts to really look at the budgeting of fiscal impacts of the blueprint. This includes understanding the changes in the funding formula, budgeting the additional funds available through the legislation, and estimating the actual expenditures of the new mandates and what they will require. And so this is the area that Mr. Conforti, our Executive Director of Budget, is going to highlight for you today. So Dr. Walker.
Thank you, Ms. Lukin. What was one of the most interesting pieces when we looked at the governance and accountability pieces, and initially when I was reading the legislation, and as we discovered, we've done some book studies on the 200 some pages of these documents. And when we were doing that, we really realized that there were some fundamental needs in how we do things in the school system in different ways than we're currently doing them in order to enact the blueprint. For example, we're going to need capacity in places for programmatic oversight, as well as accounting, budgeting, and human resources pieces that we hadn't initially thought of as part of the blueprint work, but we're going to be certainly thinking through what this reporting structure looks like and what these different charges are for our system. Additionally, and I know that the delegation is very aware of this, and we've talked about this with board and county council, our expansion of early childhood education to 3 and 4 year olds in full day programming, especially those students who are income eligible to 300%, really is looking at a capacity issue for school systems across the state as we've been discussing this. But in Howard County, we're looking definitely as capacity goes from our private partners. We're looking for capacity in terms of space, and we're looking at capacity in terms of how are we going to hire and find the staff that are qualified for these roles, that are interested in these roles. And all of these things feel very pressing in order for us to meet these desired outcomes. We know that we won't be able to be there with all students from 3 and 4 year olds next school year, but how do we take our time through 2030 to thoughtfully address more and more needs every year with the goal that the legislation had in mind? Additionally, we know that we're going to be seeing a great need to meet the needs of students who are not yet ready to be college and career ready by the end of 10th grade. And so we're thinking about, what do those interventions look like? What do those needs look like after school? What do those things look like during the day to make sure that all students are college and career ready by the end of 10th grade? We're also looking at what those pathways look like. So Howard County, for example, has not had as many different CTE pathways as some other areas. And so what do we do to make sure that there are more career and technical certificate options within our schools to align? How do we work, and we already work very well with our community college, but how do we work with our community college to ensure that we have transportation to get students to be able to access 60 credits on campus starting next school year? So there are costs that we're thinking about and planning out, and plans that we're making for implementation starting for next year. And then last, and we've been working with our county government on this recently, we've really thought about how do we implement our social work program so that the trauma-related services are in place for every school next year. And we're interested in hearing about what we're thinking about community schools with the differences in farms reporting this year due to the provision of free meals and the fact that many students have not completed applications. But we're interested in seeing how that impacts pieces for us for our planning for next year. Also, we know that we're continuing to need to bolster our after school and summer programs, as well as other things that we're doing for struggling learners. I'm going to ask Mr. Conforti to talk more about the teacher and leader pieces of this, because they really are part of our greater budget needs. But all of these pieces become part of a larger puzzle as we try to meet the needs of our students through Kerwin.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. Good afternoon, Chair Catronio, board members, our legislative delegation, and any of our county council members who are present. I'm Darren Conforti. I am the Executive Director of Budget. And as Dr. Walker and Ms. Lukeling just provided you an overview of the legislation, I'm going to try and take that information and give you all a brief and concise summary of how the legislative, the blueprint legislation adjusts the funding formulas and how those formulas are adjusting to help meet the costs, but where there may be some issues with the way in which the formulas are adjusting versus the rate at which the costs are adjusting. So I'm going to provide some high-level overview assumptions around cost changes. We are still in the process of doing the final calculations of what the costs are going to be for the FY23 budget. So the information that I'm going to be providing to you today is all very preliminary and a sense of, to give a sense of order of magnitude of how we will be managing the budget going into FY23 as it relates to the legislation. One of the things that the blueprint legislation recognized was that there were going to be substantial increases in the cost to meet the policy imperatives that were established. And so it overhauled the nature of the funding formulas. And specifically, it really changed the way that the state share and the local share were calculated. Previously, that just applied to the foundation program. Now it applies to all of the program bullet points that you see in front of you on the slide that's up on the screen right now. Next slide, please. And what the legislation did is essentially it modified the funding formulas to change the calculation of enrollment to a 3-year average. It also made an adjustment in last year for a whole harmless provision for the impacts of the pandemic, and I'm going to come back to that in a couple of slides. It also increased the per pupil funding amount by very specific values for each of the components of the major aid, and it adjusted those at various amounts between fiscal years 23 and fiscal year 33, and then it established a provision for the per pupil funding amounts to continue to adjust for inflation in the outer years. So this next slide shows you what those adjustments are. And the foundation program, which is the base level of funding, so it's the first one that is on there, that really is constitutes the bulk of the funding, formula funding for public education, and then that foundation per pupil amount informs all of the other per pupil funding amounts. And as you can see from the information provided here, the foundation funding formula is going to increase by 12.5%. The per pupil amount is going to increase by 12.5% in fiscal year 23. So that is a substantial increase. That increase is going to be, of course, very, very much needed to support the cost changes to implement the blueprint legislation. Next slide, please. So this is where understanding the nature of where the legislature where the legislation adjusts the per pupil funding amount relates to the amount of funding that comes from the state and the amount of funding that comes from the local share. So the per pupil funding is the foundation of public education funding here in Maryland, and then that per pupil funding amount is divvied. It starts at a 50-50 divvy between the state share and the local share. That's then adjusted for the relative wealth of each county. That amount is then multiplied times the enrollment to determine the required share of funding. So you can see there's a required state share, and then there is a required local share. Now, on the local government side, the local government can choose to fund above the required local share, in which case then the maintenance of effort funding formula becomes the basis for the local county funding. And this is an important point because the blueprint legislation did not modify the funding formula for the calculation of maintenance of effort funding. Next slide, please.
Quick question, Mr. Conforti, do you want questions as they come, or do you want to wait for questions?
We can take them at the end, Ms. Watts, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, no
I'm gonna
problem.
move through quickly. Yep.
Okay.
So as a result, what we've seen, and this is from all of the work that's been provided by the Department of Legislative Services, who's done an excellent job at doing the estimates and the projections all the way out into fiscal years 33 and 34. What we understand right now is that the state required formula funding will be increasing, and it's going to increase considerably. However, because here in Howard County, the local funding exceeds the required local share, and that amount is by 275%, the legislation does not drive an increase in required local funding. Even out through fiscal year 34, even with all of the escalator increases in the per pupil funding, it's not enough to close the gap. So what that means is when we start talking about the increased cost to implement the legislation, the additional funding that'll have to come from the county will have to come through the above maintenance of effort request process. And this is a considerable issue because here at the school system, 30% of our budget is funded by the state and 70% of our budget is funded by the county. And as we start to talk on the next slide about where we are seeing some of the major changes in the funding, those changes in the costs really impact the entire budget, particularly our personnel budget, which really makes up 87% of our total budget. So right now we're doing the multi-year analysis all the way out to fiscal year 30 on each of the major programmatic areas to understand what those expenditure increases could be and how that is going to relate to those revenue estimates. And there's one specific area that I do want to focus on and elaborate a little bit more to sort of illustrate the nature of the cost growth. And that is with respect to the career ladder. So on the next slide, we provide some overview information on the career ladder. And what the career ladder changes require are increases in teacher salaries. The first increase is that the salary schedule must grow by 10% between July 1, 2019 and June 30, 2024. In addition, the minimum salary for a teacher has to reach $60,000 by July 1 of 2026. And then lastly, it adds a whole series of incentive pays that are related to the career ladder and the national board certification pay. So what we've done is we've analyzed where we are here in Howard County compared to the 10% schedule increase requirement and the $60,000 salary, minimum salary requirement. And what the chart in front of you illustrates is that right now, and you can see this in the beige colored columns, we're at $50,000 as our lowest salary. In order for us to reach the $60,000 minimum salary by July 1, 2026, we would need to increase our salary schedule costs by about 3.75% a year to reach that number. Achieving the $60,000 minimum, in the process, we would satisfy the required 10% growth in the salary schedule. So the critical path for us in meeting the requirements of Kerwin is going to be reaching the $60,000 minimum of salary. And that, as I mentioned, would be potentially compound growth of up to 3.75% a year if there were only addressed with a cost of living increase to the entire salary schedule. To give you a sense of an order of magnitude of what that means in terms of cost, the next slide shows you what the compound cost for that could be. So over the next 5 years, the cost just to achieve a $60,000 minimum salary could be as much as $100 million. And this does not include the cost for the NBC pay. And the National Board Certified Pay is a base pay for a National Board Certified teacher to receive an additional $10,000 upon being certified. And then every time they maintain that National Board certification, the first time they receive $8,000 additional dollars, the second time they receive $7,000 additional dollars, and then I believe $6,000 additional dollars for the third time. And then there's some other additional layers of pay that are with the career ladder. The cost assumptions for the NBC pay are not even included in this $100 million number. So this is just to give a sense of the orders of magnitude of what the cost pressure is going to be in the school system's budget in the coming years to satisfy the requirements of the blueprint legislation. And then so to give a sense of where does that leave us with where we begin to balance our budget for fiscal year 23, the next slide shows us sort of just an initial starting point. And understanding that in fiscal year 22, we had a budget of $957 million, and we needed to use about $27 million of fund balance to balance that budget. So we had one-time monies to balance the budget. As we move into fiscal year 23, we won't have those one-time monies as a starting point. So we know that that will drive a funding gap. In addition, going back to the point about required maintenance of effort, right now, because enrollment is declined in the 3-year moving average for fiscal year 23, we are anticipating that the required funding from the county is actually going to go down for fiscal year 23, unless a whole harmless provision is put in place. So when we look at all of these numbers, before we start adding in even the major costs for the Kerwin, we are anticipating that we would be in the hole close to $30 million on our budget. And this includes a preliminary assumption of what we believe the formula funding is going to increase on the state side. We're still awaiting those estimates to come from MSDE, but on some initial analysis that we've done, we think the state's money is going to increase potentially 20 to 25 million. So even with that growth in the per pupil funding amount that I shared with you in the previous slides, we are recognizing that we're going to have a funding gap of close to $30 million before we even start factoring in all of the additional implementation costs. So this is, again, to provide a sense of the order of magnitude. The superintendent's proposed budget will be presented on January the 20th, and that will provide more detailed information on the funds necessary to balance the budget and what it's going to drive in terms of the above MOE request that's going to be necessary from the county. So it's a lot of information that I've shared with you in a short period of time, but at this point we'll open it up for questions and do our best to answer.
Mrs. Catronio, Chair Catronio is just trying to hop back on. I see her.
Hands raised. So if you want to,
Yeah. I will go through the hands raised in the order that they're presented. So Delegate Kittleman, you're up first.
Thank you. I have several questions, but the one that prompted my hand to raise is back on the chart that you showed per pupil spending. And I may have misunderstood it, but can you go back to that and give us the bottom line as to, we always use that term, the 16,000 per pupil spending. If you had to add up all of those, are we going to end up at something like 30,000 per pupil spending? Or if not, can you explain what it means?
Delegate Kittleman, Dr. Walker, can you put the slide up? There you go. Thank you very much. So Delegate Kittleman, this is the per pupil funding side.
Okay.
So the spending side, of course, will incorporate the total funding from the county above that required local share amount. And so last year, the per pupil spending was approximately in the $15,000 range. I can get you the exact number. So this is not an estimate of what that'll be. Once we've done the calculation of the fiscal year 23 budget, the budget will include what that estimated cost on a per pupil basis will be for fiscal year 23.
So there's a difference between the per pupil funding and the per pupil spending. Is that right?
Correct. Because the formula, these are the amounts established in state law. So they become the minimum amounts that have to be funded by both the state and the local. And then the added amounts that would be, which here in Howard County, as I indicated, 275% above the required minimums, that will drive the total expenditure level on a per pupil basis and above these amounts.
All right. One other question I will give you and then let you just answer has to do with the increase in teacher salaries and the National Board certification. As I understood it, the salary increases have no requirement. You simply need to be a teacher and your salary must go to that minimum. But if you then get National Board certification, you get the 10,000 and the whatevers. Is that a bump in salary or is that a one-time bonus? So thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Kilman. That becomes a permanent part of the teacher's compensation, so long as the teacher holds on to the national board certification. So just as a point of illustration, if you had a teacher that made $100,000 and they became national board certified, their base compensation would now be $110,000. And they would hold that $110,000 compensation as long as they had the national board certification.
And there is no requirement for the increases in salary other than that. That isn't even a requirement. Is that correct?
There's the 10% growth in the salary schedule itself.
That requires nothing of the teacher.
No, it does not put any specific expectation for added certifications or anything. It's just an increase in the amount that teachers are paid to make the profession more attractive and competitive to meet the world-class standards that are established in the legislation.
Delegate Kittelman, is that all? Okay, if you can lower your hand, then that will keep me on track as well. Senator Gazzoni, you're next.
Thank you. I think I heard you say that you were expecting $25 million additional money from the state this year. The calculations that I've been given are $36 million. I'm wondering what you might think is the discrepancy there.
Thank you, Senator Gazzoni. Yes, the estimates that were initially provided by DLS back in August indicated about $35.9 million, $35.6 million of new state revenue for fiscal year 23. Those estimates were based on an assumption of 59,200 enrollment as of September 30th. And right now the enrollment was about 57,300 as of September 30th. And so that's why we've downward adjusted from that 35 million. We will get the precise number from MSDE once they've done all of their official certifications for the net eligible enrollment counts.
Thank you.
There are no more hands up. So I don't know if anybody has any other additional questions. Delegate Philmark.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. One is just a quick point. You mentioned, and I missed the number, I think you mentioned the percentage of the total budget that is dedicated to personnel.
Yes, Delegate Philmark, the percent of our total operating budget, both salaries and benefits combined, is about 87%.
Okay. And I just wanted to get a sense of the pay scale. We've been talking about the minimum salaries, and in your example, you used $100,000. I think that was for ease of math, but I just wanted to get a sense of, in terms of teacher salaries and the pay scale, what percentage of teachers are earning $100,000?
I could follow up and provide you that number, Delegate Philmark. That $100,000 is towards the upper end of the salary schedule for a teacher. So, the range is from 50,000 all the way up to about 110,000. But I can follow up and provide you that information.
Okay. And as we are just talking about educators and their compensation, I know this is a little bit off the blueprint, but I did want to mention, I was, as I think many of my colleagues were, very pleased to see the county executive's announcement before the holidays about compensation as bonus pay for our educators who've really stepped up through this COVID pandemic. And I hope the board is working on matching that and a plan for implementation. I didn't know if you could give a quick update on that.
This is Vicki Antonia. Let me take off my video. I can speak to that briefly. We are considering that. We feel that all of our staff deserve to be compensated in the spirit of both recruiting and retaining our current staff. So we are considering that. It's something that the board supports, but we need to really look at, our dollars and to make sure that we can do it in a very prudent way. So we have to do this in closed meetings, but there will be more to come on that. So yes, we are very interested in doing that. But the county executive's money doesn't cover, our health services, our custodians, our, all of the other staff that have also been stepping up and working tirelessly and have been since March 2020. And I think I forget, did you have another question or was that? There was something else.
So that was the last one on this round, at least.
Okay.
Thank you.
There are, again, no additional hands. I don't know if anybody else has a question that they would like to ask.
So hard for me to see on my phone. The reason why we felt this meeting was important, and it came to light just recently when we had our joint meeting with the county council, is the funding. And it was kind of shocking, the reality of what Kerwin is going to do, especially when it comes to salaries and the somewhat unique position in Howard County because of our formulas. And so we are asking the delegation to, as you head back to Annapolis, to consider this and think of ways that could perhaps assist us going forward. Does anyone else on the board have any comments, or staff, or any questions?
I think I just kind of want to double down on what Ms. Catronia was saying, is that so there's a lot of conversation around just the teacher's salary, but if you look at even adding in the pre-K, the 3 and 4 year olds, we do not have capacity really to have them at the buildings where we currently have, students. So there will be a need for us to find other facilities that we could actually run these programs. So there's a lot in the blueprint that is going to put the county in a tough funding situation. And this is our ask of you, is to really consider a revenue stream that we can use to address the mandates coming forward from the blueprint. And I see Dr. Wu has his hand up. Go ahead, Dr. Wu.
Hi, good afternoon now. Just want to say everybody and Happy New Year 2022. I think there are 2 points I want to emphasize. The first is the funding gap, right? The number can be very big. If you look at the last page of the presentation, probably $30 to $40 million gap. And so I really hope our delegation from Howard County can really change the formula a little bit. And Howard County, as we said earlier, is 267%. And the county provide funding, right, over the MOE. So what is that? I want to let the state legislature look across the board, see how other counties are funding their own school budget. And because our county tax pretty top one already, right? So if the state can change the formula a little bit, that'd be great. And our county funding increase is really limited right now. Then the other point is the pre-K extension, as Ms. Watts said. They're limited. We don't have capacity there, and there's no school capacity. And is there any way we can relax the rule about the pre-K education classroom, and we can use a different formation of classroom, not just the standard line or that we have right now? That will help us to address the capacity concern there. And so the other one is the certificate requirement for pre-K education, and we don't have enough teachers already. So if we have the same standard for pre-K educator and we don't have teachers come in line, I think that's another concern. And if you can think about the 3 concerns come together, that put a heavy burden on the school system. We hope we can work together to address that. Thank you.
Delegate Novotny.
Happy New Year, everyone. And thanks for holding this meeting. It was very educational. So my question to the BOE in general is the only course of action you've discussed is asking for more money to fund that gap. Is there any other course of action, cutting things that are not required currently with the new Kerwin going forward? Or is it just to ask for money?
This is Vicki Cotroneo. It's law, so we have to do it. And we have in the past year just continued to cut. And it's really impacting the classroom. The most impactful way to cut is to increase class size. And that is the last thing we want to do. So yes, we have, every year we've cut, we have this aspirational budget and we go nowhere near it. And it's the fund, the dollars, it's really significant. I mean, for us to even begin to address the salary increases, we would have to increase class size short of a funding support. So, yeah, we're always thinking about that, but it's very challenging. And I just wanted to add on to the childcare aspect. This is not directly related to the school system, but is going to impact childcare and being able to recruit childcare providers. If our preschool teachers are required to have certificate and they're getting paid so much more money now, the other childcare centers are not going to be able to recruit childcare teacher or preschool teachers and such. So we're going to make it so appealing to work for the school system as a pre-K teacher because of the salaries and all of that, that I think that it's going to be setting us up for some challenges for childcare when we already are faced with those challenges. I'll let my other colleagues weigh in if they have.
Delegate Watson.
Good morning and Happy New Year, everyone. I would like the school system to, and maybe you can't do this on this call, but if you could maybe send the delegation some information around this topic. First, could you clarify the loss in enrollment in the system in the last year or two in terms of how that impacts capacity, total number of seats, geographic location? And also, can you be more specific about your needs for pre-K capacity? And again, total and by region, where do you think you have some capacity and where do you need capacity? How many, I guess, children slots does it impact? And what does that look like? I understand the big picture concern, but I think it would help us to have more details on both of those.
I would certainly say that you would want some more than we can just share right this moment, but I'll just quickly say that we have multiple sites of full-day preschool already. So 7 of our schools already have full-day programming, but we have another 20 that are part-day programming.
We can't
hear you.
I'm sorry. The very first piece that we were talking about addressing was converting our existing part-day programming to full-day programming. So that is about 20 schools of classrooms or 22 classrooms that we would be looking at. So that is the first priority for us. So we would certainly want to send you more information about all of these pieces, but then we need to look at increasing income. So when we move from 185% of eligibility to 300% of eligibility, we're assuming that there will be more students coming, not just the students that are currently enrolled. So that would be another wave of need. We also need to look at our students with disabilities who are included in these programs already and what it would take to make full day programming available there, which when we're looking at a more intensive classroom situation has additional costs and services that would come along with it as well. And then we would be also looking at our 3-year-old programming, which for the most part, we only have in place for our students with disabilities at this time. And so we would need to be adding a whole series of 3-year-old programming. This in concert with private providers. As you know, much of our growth as a county has been along the Route 1 corridor. And I do have Tim Rogers and Dan Lubley on this call, and I know that they'll want to share a little bit more about sort of where they're seeing regional needs. But at this moment, we are transporting students to regional programming sites for pre-kindergarten in general. And so students aren't necessarily in their zone school for pre-K. And so we were planning to continue a regionalized model for services. So we're happy wherever we have space, but we certainly are seeing more in the eastern part rather than the western part of our county. Tim or Dan, did you want to add anything else?
Good afternoon. I would just like to reiterate what Dr. Walker noted. The greatest location of need is on the eastern portion of the county. We have been meeting as a separate committee to, as Dr. Walker put it, to try and strategically plan out the spatial needs, starting with the increase of half day to full day, and then how that increases with the Kerwin requirement for the 185 to 300. What we do want to make sure that is understood is, as Mr. Conforti noted, we have seen an effect of our enrollment as of late due to the pandemic. We are still unsure how that will continue to affect our enrollments and projections. So we're being very cautious, anticipating a return of students coming back. So while we do take a look at what we can do in the short term with regards to, call it found space or space that we did not anticipate having previously because of the reduction in enrollment, we want to take that into account as we look forward on that strategic plan and plan for our future and the return and the continued growth of enrollment here in Howard County.
The only other piece that I'd like to note just about the early childhood funding is that we will see increased funding for those students as they move to full day, but it will follow. So we will have to pay for the students to be full day for a year before we will see the growth in our revenue because they were full day the prior year, even though we know we have the initial students in half day programming now. So we have a good sense of what we would anticipate in terms of that growth, and we can control for it in year one. We still won't see the funding in the first year just because we won't be receiving the dollars related to full day students until they are actually there.
Ms. Mallow?
I wanted to clarify and reiterate the board's commitment to meeting the needs of Kerwin. Kerwin is groundbreaking, and in general, this board supports the efforts of Kerwin to wholeheartedly revolutionize education here in Howard County. And for us to come forward with anything other than the most immediate need of funding would be counter to the goals that both you and we as a board have set, and as a state we've set. So I do want that to really be at the forefront of, we're looking for ways to fulfill the law. You have helped establish this groundbreaking program and to build it into law. And right now, that number one need is funding. And what it looks like is going to be a little bit different, whether it's to go towards salaries to recruit and retain high quality teachers. I mean, we can see right now, we've already have a problem recruiting and retaining high quality teachers. So as we move towards the 60,000 minimum, this is critical.
Ms. Catronio, do you have anything you wanted to add?
No,
go ahead.
I think, yeah, my hand was still raised, sorry.
Okay, Senator Gazzoni.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on what Smallow just stated. And I think it's probably, I don't know if we're getting ready to end up here. We're coming to an end, but look, excellence requires effort. I think we all understand that. I think I'm sure that this delegation, certainly myself, but the entire delegation is committed to working with you guys. That this is a critical moment in time because we have this great opportunity, and we should be grabbing hold of it and doing everything we can with it. I think that already, even last year, there were some components of phasing included in the Blueprint Point 2. There may be more changes along the way. Clearly, the workforce challenges aren't something that could easily be anticipated, and how they would be dealt with as we move on into the future. We've got work to do, and the expectation, I'm sure, that this is a living document, that we figure out ways to continue to work together to achieve these very significant goals for our kids. And I'm proud of supporting it. I'm proud to be doing whatever we can as a delegation to support the system, the county. We're going to have to get into the details a little more. I think some of the questions that Delegate Watson started to lay out, I've got a ton of questions, quite frankly, about how this all plays out from your perspective. And we're just going to have to sit down in the room and work on those things. And I look forward to that. But we're not going to miss out on this opportunity from my perspective. So thank you.
Delegate Kittleman.
Just a quick question. I would love to have a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, Darren, that you showed us. How can I get that?
We'll make sure that that's provided.
Thank you.
Ms. Mallow?
Senator Gazzoni, thank you for your commitment to this. Is there anything to help you recognize the needs, answer your questions, that you would like us as a board or us as Dr. Martirano's supervisor to direct him to work with you? How would you like that to look? And what can we set up starting now, looking for, let's plan down the road, let's get those questions answered? How would you like that to, what would you like that to look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think we just really, like I said, I think we need to set up some discussions and some meetings around the table. I need to bring in some of the staff from the budget committees. Here's the thing. I mean, look, if Howard County can't pull this together to success, I look around the state and there's some other jurisdictions that are much more challenging. I think someone alluded to that earlier. We've got to figure out not only what it means for us, but what it means for the entire state and how people are responding to it, the timeframes in which they're going to have to respond to these issues, the funding timeframes that they'll need to respond to. So I think the simple answer is that the only way to really do that is to get with your budget people and some budget people from the state and have those very clear discussions and understandings of what impacts are expected and what outcomes are expected.
Chair Cotroneo.
I believe that Council Member Liz Walsh is on. I'm not sure if any other council members are on, but I wanted to also include the county in on any of these discussions because they were quite frankly shocked that, you know, at the pending budget that's coming up, it is they who are our funding source directly. So I'm wondering if Council Member, not to put you on the spot, but if you have any input or what would you like to be involved in as a council?
Sure. This is Liz. Thank you, Vicki, for inviting us to sit in on this. I would take issue with two of the words you just used, though, Vicki, is shocked. I think here at this late date is not really a reasonable verb. When we were all running for office 3 years ago, Kerwin was high on the marquee, and I went to those meetings and heard that, you know, those proposals come out, and we've seen this coming for such a long time that what I'm shocked at is that we seem to be so flat-footed. And then in terms of where your money comes from, what the council gets, and Deb Young has this down to like a rhyming jingle, but what the council gets from the executive is fairly limited in what we can do with it. We're the last people who see the education budget, the five of us on the council. So if it's not where
the school system needs it to be by the time it gets to Calvin Ball, and by the time Calvin Ball gives it to the 5 of us in the council, there's not much that we can do. So the real imploring that we had in that joint meeting with the Board of Education earlier, or late last year, was to have all of us stakeholders, the state delegation, the county executive, the board, and our council members be involved in those difficult decisions and choices and prioritizations that we have to make, so that it doesn't become so unpleasant in May when we're at the end of the line on a given annual budget. That these are long-term considerations that are going to have lasting, hopefully really positive effects. I totally love what Jim Mallow said about this is a really good thing. Everyone agrees this is what we need to do. But what the harder part is agreeing on how we accomplish that. And so I really commend the board for initiating these conversations now, for pushing us to keep having them, and for finding those solutions in the near term that we can sustain over a longer one that does the best that we can do for our kids in our school system.
Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to the request for the slides that you shared today. If you can also, obviously the PowerPoint presentation was a summary, right? But if you can share with us really more information about what costs go into those totals, that would be helpful from my perspective, and I think would is an important first step towards the conversation that Senator Gazzoni was talking about also.
And Delegate Feldmark, if I can respond to that, Jahan Tafsadiki, Chief Administrative Officer, those are estimates that we're working on. We're working through the submissions that we received towards the end of last year from our departments. It's the work that Dr. Walker has been leading with multiple work groups. We do expect through the superintendent's budget to meet all of the requirements of the blueprint legislation, as Ms. Mallow stated. HCPSS is committed to fulfilling the requirements of the blueprint, and so the budget that the superintendent will be bringing forward in a matter of about 2 or 3 weeks will encompass all of those costs and will provide a very detailed background. So at that point, we can certainly go into more conversations like Senator Gazzoni talked about with staff from DLS and various committees to help determine and discuss how that implementation will work.
Great, thank you.
And I'm going to wrap up, hopefully maybe one last question. I think one of the things that the board is really trying to ask, and I will do it way less delicate than Ms. Mallow, but we have a law that we have to meet, and we have lawmakers in front of us who have the ability to help us fund it. And that is what we're asking right now. Right now, we have a law that we can't meet financially. We just don't have the resources to meet it. And we're sitting with our lawmakers and asking you to help make laws to help fund it. Otherwise, we can't meet this. We can't meet this law that you've made. And so I like the shock and awe is because all of a sudden we have something here that everybody is asking questions about the financials of it, when the law was made, and I feel like there was something was missed here in understanding how we're actually going to fund everything that is being asked. So that's kind of where I am. I want to make sure that everybody leaves here understanding that, there's a law here that we need to meet, and we just don't have the money to do it. And so we're asking our county council as well to help make laws to help fund this mandate. And that's all I have. This is Ms. Catronio. Do you want to wrap it up? We have 1 minute.
Yeah, that was a little less delicate than Ms. Mallow, but I think it's the truth. So I do want to thank everyone for joining us, and any information that you want, please email our admin, Ms. Harrison, and we'd be happy. I know that we have a synopsis sort of Kerwin. Dr. Walker, is that correct? Like I have a document that's like our analysis. Would that be something that's worthwhile to share with the delegation?
We can share what work we've done and put together thus far. We'd be happy to, and we can answer the questions that we've received today.
And just to add on to my colleagues, without the funding, we'll have to make catastrophic decisions to meet the law because we have no choice. So we do appreciate your attending the meeting and your collaboration and your support and advocacy. And I'm sure we'll be talking again very soon and often. Thank you, everyone. There were no other questions, right, Ms. Watts?
No, that's
Okay.
it. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Did anybody from the delegation wanted to do closing remarks? Or are we signing off?
I think we have a hard stop at 1.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Good
Thank you.
afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.